When it comes to dinosaurs, all scientists can do is study bones and make educated guesses about the rest. And spoiler alert, sometimes they're dead wrong. Here are a few cases of dino science gone awry. In the latter half of the 17th century, the debate about fossils was heating up, also because scientists back then weren't completely sure what they were looking at. Robert Plot, an Oxford chemistry professor and museum keeper, offered a dubious answer in 1677 when he published his book Natural History of Oxfordshire, Giant Humans. When workers unearthed a strange-looking object from an English quarry, Plot correctly identified it as a fragment of petrified thigh bone. However, because it didn't match any creature known to science at the time, Plot proposed that it came from a man or woman, quote, of proportionable stature. He included an illustration of the fossil in his book, which today's experts recognize as the first published dinosaur bone image. Fast forward to 1763, when a physician named Richard Brooks took a look at the illustration and decided, hey, those totally look like testicles.
Giant testicle monsters!
Proudly applying the binomial naming system that botanist Carl Linnaeus began using a decade earlier, Brooks labeled it Scrotum humanum and included the artwork in his own book. By 1824, an Oxford academic and paleontologist named William Buckland gave it the far more dignified name Megalosaurus. And despite the fact that Brooks originally named the fossil, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature declared Buckland's idea a better fit. It's important to understand that in the early 19th century, people were only beginning to figure out what dinosaurs were. That's how the world ended up with a Mesozoic-inspired masterpiece, the inaccurate dinosaur statues in London's Crystal Palace.
All the bones were put together. But maybe it mattered which bone went where.
Built in the 1850s, the sculptures featured 3 different dinosaurs, built based on the limited data available at the time. Thus, the carnivorous bipedal Megalosaurus became a 4-legged creature resembling a Komodo dragon, the armored Haleosaurus became a spiked-backed lizard, and the pointy-thumbed Iguanodon was represented by 2 massive iguana-like animals, each sporting a small nasal horn. In an interview with the Natural History Museum, researcher Susie Maidment explained how paleontologist Gideon Mantell, whose wife Mary Ann is widely recognized as the discoverer of the first iguanodon fossils, ended up incorrectly reconstructing the dinosaur based on partial fossils. She explained, they found the thumb spike and stuck it on the end of the nose, a bit like a rhinoceros.
Why did you put his head on his ass? It's supposed to be on the other end, you dingus!
Almost 3 decades later, in 1878, a coal mine in Belgium yielded a big surprise, 30 nearly complete iguanodon fossils. This helped bring dinosaur experts closer to anatomical accuracy. Still, while they didn't manage to assemble iguanodon correctly, they mistakenly assumed it stood like a tail-dragging kangaroo. Finally, in 1980, new research revealed iguanodon's true stiff-tailed, 4-legged posture. Hey, at least the Crystal Palace statues got something right. In 1923, paleontologists from the American Museum of Natural History went on an expedition to Mongolia.
Desert sandstorms would rip the tents out of the ground or the shirts off their backs.
Under the hot sun of the Gobi Desert, they stumbled upon an interesting find, eggs that apparently belonged to Protoceratops, a small frilled dinosaur, and a previously undescribed dinosaur skull on top of one of the nests. The researchers figured that the skull belonged to a dinosaur that was likely killed for trying to steal some eggs. It was a reasonable assumption. After all, the toothless dinosaur's curved jaws looked like they were made for cracking eggs. A year later, paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn gave it the unflattering name Oviraptor, meaning egg thief. 70 years later, in 1993, the arid region gave up another puzzle piece in the story of this Mesozoic mistake. Due to the discovery of similar-looking eggs containing Oviraptor embryos, experts realized that the egg thief wasn't stealing eggs, but guarding its own. Furthermore, Oviraptor's powerful maw wasn't made for breaking eggshells, but for crushing tough food. Talk about having egg on your face. The discovery of more dinosaur remains in the 19th and 20th centuries stoked the curiosity of academics and the general public, and the quest to find out what these prehistoric animals looked like when they were alive spawned a genre of creative and intelligent guesswork, paleo-art. Paleo-artists like Charles M. Knight used evidence and imagination to create visual representations of a lost world. However, they tended to depict their prehistoric subjects as lethargic, tail-dragging, unintelligent creatures that time had a good reason to forget. As the conversation put it, viewed as evolutionary failures, dinosaurs were bloated, sluggish beasts in primordial swamps. Take Tyrannosaurus rex, for example. Up until the late 20th century, various films and artwork featured the theropod with downward-facing bunny hands and a tail that functioned as a third leg, like a tripod. Paleo artists weren't the only ones who got it wrong, however. Scientists at the time couldn't even decide whether dinosaurs were warm or cold-blooded. It was a 1964 discovery of Deinonychus, an agile sickle-toed carnivore, that showed scientists the answer was a bit more complicated. Modern science tells us the connection between brain size and intelligence isn't as clear-cut as it seems. Sperm whales, for example, have the biggest brains in the world, but they aren't necessarily rocket scientists. At least we don't think so. But back in the day, the size matters theory is why Stegosaurus got a raw deal for many years.
Stegosaurus was one of the titans of the Jurassic Age, but surprisingly little is known about its anatomy.
Based on the imprint left in its skull, experts estimated that Stegosaurus had a brain the size of a walnut, although dinosaur expert Kenneth Carpenter disagrees, describing it more as the size and shape of a bent hot dog. Stegosaurus had one of the lowest dinosaur brain-to-body ratios, making it easy for pop culture to turn him into the poster boy of Mesozoic moronity. In fact, scientists didn't think Stegosaurus had enough brain power to even function properly. So when they noticed that its spinal column had a cavity in the region above its rear legs, they figured there was enough space there for a second brain. But the notion of a Stegosaurus with a spare brain in its butt was eventually proved false. In fact, it's more likely that the hip cavity contained a bundle of nerves to help it control its appendages or a glycogen body for energy storage like today's birds. The Piltdown Man is one of paleontology's most powerful cautionary tales, proof that with sufficient skill one could create a fossil composite capable of fooling the most eagle-eyed experts. Nearly 90 years later, another story of a fake missing link emerged. This time, however, instead of being inserted into the narrative of human evolution, it was an attempt to show how birds descended from dinosaurs, and it successfully bamboozled one of the world's most trusted media institutions.
Since no one of these guys learned how to fly.
In 1999, National Geographic introduced the world to Archaeoraptor, a fossil from China with feathered arms and a dinosaur tail. But the discovery was problematic. For starters, you're not supposed to just name a new dinosaur without scientific consensus. Furthermore, the paper describing Archaeoraptor never appeared in a peer-reviewed journal. Eventually, the truth came out. Archaeoraptor was a forgery, a composite of fragments from different animals crafted by farmers seeking to make a quick buck from non-Chinese fossil hunters. Aside from embarrassing everyone involved, Archaeoraptor also fueled the arguments of people who disagreed with the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs. But in recent years, we've seen new verified evidence of feathered dinosaurs.
Currently know of about 60 dinosaur species that are completely covered in feathers, just like modern birds.
In fact, tests revealed that part of Archaeoraptor belonged to an actual previously unknown feathered dinosaur, Microraptor. So Archaeoraptor did end up reinforcing the feathered dinosaur theory, just not in the way it was intended. From 1914's Brute Force to 1993's Jurassic Park, movies reinforce the notion that all dinosaurs were scaly reptilians. Velociraptor is perhaps the most famous example. Portrayed as cold, calculating, and crocodilian, the Predator is the breakout star of the Jurassic Park films. In reality, though, the franchise's velociraptors were closer in size to Deinonychus than the actual turkey-sized velociraptors. More importantly, just like other members of the meat-eating dinosaur group called dromaeosaurs, velociraptors had feathers. Thomas Henry Huxley was one of the early proponents of the feathered dinosaurs idea. In 1868, he observed significant structural similarities between the tiny theropod Compsognathus and the bird-like dinosaur Archaeopteryx, which was originally classified as a prehistoric bird. Given the limited evidence of feathered dinosaurs at the time, many scientists didn't support this idea. The debate raged on until 1996, when the discovery of Sinosauropteryx, a dinosaur fossil with feather imprints, settled it once and for all. Indeed, there were feathered dinosaurs, and birds did come from them. So until new fossil evidence pops up to say otherwise, birds are in fact living dinosaurs. The late 19th century rivalry between scientists Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope, a bitter feud historians call the Bone Wars, brought out the worst in them. For 15 years, the two men strove to outdo each other and prove who was the better paleontologist.
If you find any more dinosaur bones, don't send them to Cope, send them to me.
They discovered 136 new dinosaur species combined, but destroyed their reputations and their finances along the way. And another side effect of this dino duel was a case of mistaken Mesozoic identity. In 1877, Marsh found the fossilized remains of a sauropod. Though it was missing its skull, Marsh realized that he was looking at a previously unknown species and named it Apatosaurus. 2 years later, his team came across a more complete Apatosaurus specimen, this time with its skull. In his haste to one-up Cope, Marsh decided that it was an entirely different dinosaur and gave it the name Brontosaurus. However, when experts took a more in-depth look at his research in 1903, they decided that Marsh's Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus were actually the same species, although the idea of the Brontosaurus remained in public consciousness for decades afterward. In 2015, a group of scientists suggested reviving the Brontosaurus genus based on their observations that the two skeletons actually have significant differences. Will there be a Brontosaurus comeback? Only time will tell. Experts estimate that we've only discovered about a third of all the Mesozoic dinosaur species, so it's no shocker that science has made, and will probably continue to make, contradictory claims about which dinosaur was the biggest. Among the most well-known examples is Ultrasaurus, a long-necked dinosaur whose existence started getting media coverage in 1979. But Ultra turned out to be a chimera of multiple sauropods in the same fossil bed. And then there's Dreadnoughtus, noteworthy for the fact that over 70% of its bones were discovered, which means unlike other sauropods, its size could be calculated with confidence. Nearly a year after its discovery, though, scientists realized that, oops, it probably only had 2/3 of the mass they originally thought. Out of all the known dinosaurs, either Argentinosaurus or Patagotitan could be the biggest, depending on the definition of biggest. Stay tuned. Near the end of the Bone Wars, Marsh described two of the largest and most well-known horned dinosaurs of all, Triceratops and Torosaurus. Both have 3 horns and massive frills, though Torosaurus's frill was longer. For more than 100 years, experts generally agreed with Marsh's assessment that the two Cretaceous plant eaters had enough morphological differences to warrant being classified as separate species. However, in 2010, paleontologists John Scannella and Jack Horner offered a controversial take. Torosaurus was actually the adult form of Triceratops. After looking at numerous specimens, the two reportedly saw hints of the bone undergoing change in Triceratops skulls, as well as heavily remodeled tissues in Torosaurus's remains, suggesting they were all adults. In other words, there were no tiny pterosaurs. But in the way of dinosaur science, subsequent research cast doubt on the theory, and to this day, Triceratops and Torosaurus are still officially classified as different animals. Few dinosaurs have gone through as many bizarre and dramatic changes in their scientific interpretation as the sailed-backed Spinosaurus, the largest known meat-eating dinosaur. In 1915, German paleontologist Ernst Stromer described the species based on a partial skeleton discovered 3 years earlier. But those remains, the only known Spinosaurus fossils at the time, were destroyed during World War II. For decades, paleontologists could only study Stromer's surviving sketches, which depicted the animal as a terrestrial carnivore with a bulky build, a kangaroo-like posture, and a carnosaur-like head. It was nearly a century after Stromer's original discovery when paleontologists found a relatively complete Spinosaurus specimen, which forced them to rethink the way the theropod had been portrayed for decades. Modern-day findings have revealed that Spinosaurus was likely semi-aquatic and a fish-eater, with a long crocodilian snout and a thick paddle-like tail it probably used to propel itself through rivers as it searched for prey.